1944, 75 years ago. A young Army private surveys the Italian landscape, ravaged by World War II. The private's only been in Italy for 3 weeks, and it must have contrasted starkly with the quiet farm fields of his home in eastern North Carolina. The soldier is part of Company F, 7th Infantry, and the Army has just broken out of the Anzio beachhead after being held at bay for several months by German troops. The objective was to drive the Nazis from Rome and secure a front in advance of Eisenhower's Overlord operation, which was happening on the Normandy coast on the other side of the continent. The fighting at Anzio is severe. In fact, of the 150,000 Allied troops there at Anzio, 7,000 are killed and another 36,000 are wounded or missing. The soldier in our story engages Nazi positions on the road to Rome. The terrain is treacherous. In fact, it was said that there were only 2 directions at Anzio, up the hill and down the hill. Reverting to ancient methods, the Allied troops used donkeys to carry equipment and weapons. As the young private advances with his company against Nazi positions, he was hit by a mortar round. The fragments from the mortar not only damage his body, but they also dislodge a pin from a grenade he was carrying. And the grenade explodes on his hip. Mistaken for dead, the man is placed in a pile with other presumed deceased soldiers. As another soldier passes by later in the day, he notices the young man gasp and gurgle, and he calls for medical attention. Although the soldier is eviscerated and gravely injured, he survives and recovers for the next 3 months in an Italian hospital. While there, he is fed a constant diet of spaghetti. He's permanently disabled and has trouble walking for the rest of his life, but he returns home to raise a family. He becomes a building supervisor with the federal government General Services Administration, and he works at federal buildings across eastern North Carolina, managing those buildings. That soldier was my grandfather, William Curtis Heath, Sr. Once back in the United States, he never eats spaghetti again for the rest of his life. Like many veterans, my grandfather never talked about his war experience very much. Maybe the memories were something that he tried to forget, or he was just trying to spare me or other family members from the gruesome details. But I've often thought about what it must have been like to go to war, and I've often wondered if I would have the same courage to go through what my grandfather went through. What inner strengths do all of our veterans draw upon when they are called upon to serve? What motivates them? Perhaps it is the recognition that sometimes we have to stand up for the values on which our nation was founded, namely, the freedom to live our lives in peace, to work hard for the prosperity of our families, to express generosity or acts of kindness to our family, friends, or even strangers that we meet on the street, to worship God as we choose, to speak freely our minds without fear of reprisal, to assemble peaceably, and to expect our governments to be responsible and address the problems at hand. Perhaps it is something even more simple than that. For many veterans, it comes down to them doing what they can, in fact, what they must, to protect this place we call home, the United States of America. Sometimes our veterans have to not only fight the enemy, they have to conquer injustices along the way. One such veteran was Joseph Tolson, who lived in the Old Neck community of Perquimans County. In July 1944, Joseph's father received a telegram that read, "Deeply regret to inform you that your son, Seaman Second Class Joseph Tolson, is missing and presumed dead as a result of an explosion occurring at 10:22 p.m. 17 July 1944 at Port Chicago." Port Chicago is located about 30 minutes north of San Francisco, and it was transformed into a munitions facility to support operations in the Pacific Theater during World War II. The task of loading and unloading the ships containing these bullets, bombs, and depth charges was given to segregated African American units. Joseph Tolson was a part of one of these teams that unloaded munitions 24 hours a day, many times hand to hand, with no safety training and with much pressure to speed up loading. Wisely, many of the enlisted men were nervous about loading these incendiary bombs, but were told that the fuses were not installed and would not be fully operational until they reached the combat zones. These assurances turned out to be deceptive and deadly. On the night of 17 July, the ship SSEA Bryan was being loaded for transport. For reasons that are still not clear, at 10:18 p.m., the 4,600 tons of explosives on the ship ignited. 320 people, including Joseph Tolson, were instantly killed. An Army Air Force plane in the vicinity, flying at above 9,000 feet, reported chunks of molten metal flying past them in the air. The SSEA Bryan, the ship that exploded, it weighed 25 million pounds. It was totally disintegrated, and no distinguishable pieces were left. Seismographs at UC Berkeley in California recorded the event at 3.4 on the Richter scale. Most of the 320 people killed were African American enlisted sailors. That number represents 15% of the total World War II African American naval deaths in that one incident. Approximately 1 month after the explosion at Port Chicago, continued hazardous working conditions led to the Port Chicago Mutiny, in which 50 African American men refused to load munitions. They were eventually court-martialed, jailed, and dishonorably discharged. After public outcry, 47 of the 50 sentences were commuted. The Navy implemented safer procedures for loading munitions, and a greater emphasis was placed on proper training, and it led to the eventual desegregation of the Navy in February 1946. There is now a national memorial at the site of Port Chicago for the victims of the disaster. Joseph Tolson's name is engraved there forever in the annals of his country's heroes. Not many people realize that Joseph Tolson is buried in the Melton Grove Baptist Church Cemetery in Windfall. The story of Joseph Tolson reminds us that the beauty of America is that from all of our divisions, we have always eventually emerged strengthened. I pray that our country will continue in this spirit as we approach the future together. President Woodrow Wilson declared in 1918 that on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month at 11 a.m., the nation would stop to remember the armistice that ended World War I, the war to end all wars. In 1954, President Eisenhower declared the national holiday's name changed to Veterans Day to honor all that have served. The liberties and values that our nation stands for are all safe today because the brave women and men in our midst at this ceremony have been ready to answer the call when service beckons them to action, to stand at the front and fight for freedom for you, me, and our families. To the veterans here today, we say thank you and God bless you. To the families that you left behind to go to serve, we say thank you for your sacrifice and for holding down the fort at home. For those who bear the scars of battle, we pledge to honor you and respect you. So help us God. Thank you.
Thank you.